It didn't start with a slap. It started when I said no. The word wasn't loud, not even dramatic, just final. I said it once, at my own engagement party, in front of a manicured lawn full of white tablecloths and sparkling stemware. And I said it to my mother while holding a glass of champagne that had suddenly turned sour in my hand. No, I won't give Sable the money. 5 seconds passed, long enough for the string quartet to stumble off beat, long enough for my fiancé, Corbin, to glance up from the toast he was preparing, long enough for my mother's smile to die, slowly, precisely, as if she'd rehearsed it. Then came the slap, not a movie slap, a real one. The kind that leaves a fingerprint on skin and silence in the air. My head jerked sideways, and the glass shattered on the patio stones. Somewhere in the distance, a phone buzzed, then another. I didn't look at the cameras. I didn't check if my hair had stayed in place. I looked at her, my mother, Marjorie Vexley, public charity chairwoman, widow, polished matriarch, the woman who just hit me because I wouldn't write my sister a check for $45,000. Not because Sable was in danger, not because it was a life or death emergency, but because she deserved a wedding worthy of the family name. Her words, not mine. I didn't cry, not then. I think some part of me had been waiting for this moment my whole life. The story was already taking form around us. I could feel it twisting in the air, someone filming, someone whispering. I could feel the audience folding the facts into what they wanted to believe. The rich girl refusing to help, her sweet, struggling sister. The uptight daughter turning on her selfless mother. It didn't matter that I paid the mortgage on Marjorie's condo, or that Sable's student loans were under my name, or that I'd covered every holiday, every broken-down car, every emergency trip to urgent care, because facts don't trend. Drama does, and Marjorie knew how to deliver a scene. 3 hours later, I sat in a cold hotel suite, downtown. I hadn't gone back to my own penthouse. Marjorie had keys to it. So did Sable, a fact that had never bothered me until that night. Corbin arrived last. His tie was gone, and his voice was tight with careful restraint. "Are you okay?" I wanted to say yes, but the question was too simple, and I was past simple answers. "She hit me," I said instead. "Because I said no." Corbin nodded slowly. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees. "I've never seen anything like that." "You've never seen them like that," I corrected. Because he hadn't. No one had. Not the donors who adored Marjorie's Sunday brunches, not the friends who gushed about Sable's resilience after her second layoff, not the investors I reassured every quarter, telling them my family was solid. Solid was a lie. What we were was choreographed. That night, something inside me cracked open, clean, silent, but irreversible. Not anger exactly, not even betrayal. Clarity. Clarity that I'd been subsidizing dysfunction for years and calling it love. That every time I helped, I taught them I could be used. That I wasn't their daughter or sister, I was their business model. I opened my laptop and pulled up my personal bank records. A folder named Family sat in the archive. I hadn't touched it in months. Inside, 73 wire transfers, car lease agreements, hospital receipts that should have been covered by insurance. One tuition payment made out to Evergreen Floral Academy, not a college. Sable had decided she wanted to be a wedding planner. It lasted 6 weeks. I scrolled, and I scrolled. The total, $367,000, not including the $45,000 they demanded that night. When the video hit social media the next day, I wasn't surprised. I was surprised it took that long. The angle wasn't great. You couldn't see the slap, only hear it. Sharp, sickening, then silence. My voice didn't carry, but Marjorie's did. "She owes us, United States, not loves, not values, not understands, just owes." I didn't reply to any of the messages that flooded in. Some gushed sympathy, others demanded to know what really happened. I deleted them all. There was no explanation that would make sense to strangers who only understood spectacle. But there were 2 messages I didn't ignore. One from Nico Farron, My lawyer. One from Corbin. Simple. Just 3 words. We need distance. The thing about betrayal is this: it doesn't show up with sirens. It builds in quiet increments. It smiles at your holidays. It wears your last name. And sometimes it waits until you're standing on the edge of your happiest moment to push you over. But I wasn't falling. Not this time. I was waking up. There's a moment after every explosion when the world feels too quiet. The smoke hasn't cleared, but the noise is gone. And all you're left with is the shape of the wreckage. That's where I was, staring at my laptop screen, cursor blinking next to the folder marked family. That one word used to mean safety. Now it was a ledger. I'd always known I was supporting them more than I should. What I hadn't realized, what I hadn't let myself realize, was how much they'd made me believe I had to. Not out of gratitude, not out of love, but out of some unspoken deal inked in guilt and childhood debt. I opened the first PDF. It was a bank authorization form, not mine, not recent. The name on it read Sable Vexley, but the email tied to the approval was mine. A burner account I never created, signed T. Vexley, in a forged signature that looked almost perfect. Almost. The transaction: a $15,500 payment to a high-end wedding boutique in Santa Barbara. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. This wasn't a slip. It wasn't a mistake. This was a strategy, and it had been executed with the kind of practiced confidence that only comes from repetition. I dialed Nico Farron. He answered on the second ring. "I've been waiting for your call." There was no small talk. There never was, not with Nico. He'd been with me since the year I launched Evernote Capital, and he was the only person outside of Corbin who knew what it had cost to get here, emotionally, financially, familially. "I need you to audit my accounts," I said. "Everything tied to my name, personal and business." His voice didn't waver. "You think they've done more than you've seen." "I think I've been asleep," I said quietly, "and they've been wide awake." While Nico worked, I sifted through the details: transaction histories, loan authorizations, password changes, medical bills that had mysteriously tripled after insurance glitches. Each line item told a story, but none of them were mine. They were written through me, without me. There were recurring charges to a private wellness clinic upstate. Sable's name appeared on one of the receipts for an emergency evaluation I'd supposedly paid for. I had no memory of it, no context, but the timestamp aligned perfectly with the week I'd been out of the country for a fintech conference. They hadn't even waited for me to get home, and I'd said nothing. Not when Serena borrowed my Amex for a dress and racked up 4 months of international purchases. Not when my mother needed just a little help settling property tax issues that turned out to be from a house she never told me she owned. Each silence had become a permission slip. Corbin came by that evening. He didn't knock. He used his key, something that felt strangely invasive now, even though I'd given it to him willingly. "I ordered dinner," he said softly. "I thought maybe we could talk." I looked up from my screen. "Are you sure you want to know the truth?" He sat. "I'm not scared of truth, Taryn. I'm scared of what you've been carrying alone." I wanted to believe that. But belief had become a currency I was no longer offering without collateral. I showed him the documents, lines of charges, forged forms, overlapping names. He went quiet, more quiet than I expected. And then he said something that caught me off guard. "Do you think they know how wrong this is? Or do you think they think it's normal?" The question wasn't rhetorical, and it wasn't naive. It was dangerous, because it forced me to consider that this might not just be manipulation. It might be indoctrination. When you're raised to serve a system that only functions if you stay silent, you start confusing abuse with duty. And when the abusers are the people who tucked you in at night and taught you how to spell your name, the betrayal isn't just financial, it's foundational. My mother didn't think she'd done anything wrong. Neither did Sable. They were, in their minds, simply collecting what was owed. Nico called at midnight. "I found something," he said. Actually, I found several somethings. We need to meet. Just tell me. No, he said flatly. In person. Paper trail's too deep. And Taryn, this isn't just about the money anymore. There was a pause on the line. Nico? They've accessed your identity. My stomach tightened. Meaning? Your birth certificate was requested last month from a third-party verification service using your social. I cross-referenced the IP. It's someone in your mother's zip code. He didn't have to say more. I already knew. When I hung up, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just stared at the wall, remembering a day years ago when I was maybe 11. I had come home from school, clutching a field trip permission slip. I was so excited, bouncing with energy, telling Marjorie it was a museum exhibit I'd dreamed of seeing. She'd smiled, told me of course I could go, and then handed me her credit card. Use this, she said. Sign it like me, just this once. She called it practice. I called it normal. Now I understood. It had never been a game. It had been a rehearsal. The thing about people like my mother is that they never scream. They don't have to. They smile instead. When I arrived at her house, 3 days after the engagement party, Marjorie greeted me with the same glossy calm she wore to every donor luncheon. Her front door opened without hesitation, and her voice was warm, polite, unbothered. Taryn, she said, as if nothing had happened. You look tired. You've been working too hard again. There was no mention of the slap, no apology, not even a flicker of embarrassment, just a tea kettle on the stove and a fresh orchid in the foyer. I stepped inside, more out of curiosity than comfort. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, immaculate, cold, curated like a catalog home. But I saw it differently now. Every picture frame felt like a stage prop, every rug a distraction from what was rotting beneath the floorboards. She motioned for me to sit at the dining table, the same one she once refused to eat at, unless we used cloth napkins. Her performative elegance had always been a religion, and now I knew what it was built to conceal. I'm not here for tea, I said evenly. She folded her hands with faint disapproval. That's unfortunate. I made jasmine, your favorite. No, I said. It's your favorite. You just told me it was mine so often that I started believing it. That earned the first crack in her expression. A flicker, barely there, but real. I laid the documents on the table, one after another. Wire transfers, duplicate credit lines, the forged signature, Nico's forensic audit summaries. I let the silence fill the room between each page, like dropping stones into still water. She didn't flinch. When I finished, she looked at them, not like someone caught, but like someone evaluating the quality of the print. I see you've been busy, she said finally. My jaw tensed. That's your response? Marjorie's smile never quite reached her eyes. You've always had a flair for overreaction, darling. That's not an overreaction, I said. It's identity theft. It's fraud. She blinked slowly, as if I'd disappointed her. Taryn, everything you have, your business, your name, your image. Do you think you built all of that alone? It landed like a cold slap, softer than the one from the engagement party, but crueler, because she believed it. She truly believed that my success belonged to her, not because she worked for it, not because she sacrificed anything real, but because she mothered me. And in her eyes, that gave her permanent access to everything I built. I cleaned your vomit at 3 in the morning. I sold my rings to get your braces. I fought your school board over that ridiculous math placement exam. Do you remember that? Yes, I said. And then you told everyone you met for the next 10 years how you got me into advanced placement, how you made me. She sipped her tea. And I did. There it was, not denial, entitlement. She didn't see herself as a thief. She saw herself as a partner. You used my social security number to request my birth certificate, I said. You filed for credit cards I never signed. You created an email pretending to be me. You weren't using them, she said, eyes wide, feigning confusion. And besides, I always knew you'd catch it eventually. You're too smart not to. I trusted you to clean it up when it got messy. That was the part that broke me. She hadn't even tried to hide it. Because hiding something implies guilt. Marjorie felt entitled to the mess, and entitled to me fixing it. I stood up, not suddenly, not with anger, but with finality. I'm pressing charges. That was the first time her face changed. You wouldn't do that, she said, her voice dipping for the first time. You wouldn't humiliate this family like that. I don't have a family, I said, already moving toward the door. I had a financial dependency chain wrapped in pearls. Her voice sharpened. What about Sable? What will she do? Maybe learn, I said. Maybe finally grow up. She stood too, fast enough that her teacup rattled. Don't walk out like you're righteous, Taryn. Don't pretend you're better than us. I turned, one hand already on the doorknob. I'm not pretending, I said. I just stopped apologizing for being the only adult in this family. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because there's a grief that comes with waking up. Real grief. The kind that doesn't come from losing people, but from realizing they were never who you thought they were in the first place. Marjorie wasn't broken. She was engineered. She'd raised me not to love, but to owe. And when I stopped paying, she came collecting. The next morning, a handwritten note slid under my office door. It was from Sable. Please don't destroy her. She doesn't know how to survive without control. No apology. No ownership. Just one more request for mercy, disguised as sisterly concern. Some chains don't rattle. They complement you while tightening. There's a difference between cutting someone off and holding them accountable. One ends a conversation. The other begins a war. By the time I met Nico at his private office suite in Tribeca, my jaw had stopped clenching, but the resolve had crystallized. We sat across from each other. No coffee, no chit-chat, just paper, screens, strategy. I've filed the preliminary report, he said. Your mother has leveraged your identity across at least 3 credit systems. The forged documents alone qualify for state and federal prosecution. I nodded. And Sable? She's harder to isolate. Her name appears on too many things that could be passed off as familial misunderstanding. Unless we can prove intention. I finished for him. He leaned back in his chair, the room filled with the faint hum of the city below. You sure about this, Taryn? Yes, I said. But I'm not just doing this for me. I need a public record of what they are. I won't let them rewrite this. Nico didn't smile, but his eyes changed. Respect? Maybe. Or relief that I wasn't retreating into passivity. Then we build this brick by brick, he said. Clean, irrefutable, airtight. We started with subpoenas, official requests for Sable's financial history, Marjorie's digital activity logs, IP tracking for the forged documents. I hadn't realized how meticulous Nico had been behind the scenes until now. He'd been watching this storm form for years, and he had contingency folders for every cloud. Do you want to go public before or after the case is filed? He asked. Neither, I said. I want it airtight before I say a word. If I speak now, they'll spin it. I want the spin to choke them, not protect them. 3 days passed. I didn't hear from Marjorie, but I did receive a message from someone else. It was an email sent through an encrypted, anonymous inbox. Subject line. You don't know me, but I know what they did. I nearly deleted it. My name was being dragged across enough pixels. But something about the phrasing, the stillness of it, made me pause. I opened the message. I used to work for your mother. I left 3 years ago. She threatened legal action if I spoke. But I have files, documents she told me to destroy, financial records she hid from donors, and you. She has a habit of using other people's names. You weren't the first. There was an attachment, a zip folder, password protected. The sender signed only as R. Lowen. I stared at the screen for a full minute before forwarding the file to Nico. I didn't ask questions. I didn't speculate. I just wrote, urgent, verified chain of custody, meet tomorrow. When I arrived the next morning, Nico had already unzipped the files. This changes the landscape, he said. Inside the folder were scanned invoices, reimbursement memos, falsified donation receipts. One entry stood out immediately: $12,000 processed through a shell account linked to a women's mental health charity. The signature at the bottom: Taryn Vexley. Dated 2 years ago. I'd been in Singapore that week. That's fraud across multiple jurisdictions, Nico said, voice tight with calculation. It's not just theft now, it's laundering. I exhaled slowly. And the sender? Former assistant, real name, Rachel Lowen. She worked for Marjorie for 5 years, mostly foundation work. When she tried to leave and blow the whistle, your mother threatened her with a non-disclosure clause. Does she want to testify? She's scared, but she's watching. I didn't contact Rachel right away. Instead, I pulled up the foundation's annual report from the year in question. There it was, my name again, as executive donor advisor, a position I'd never held, accompanied by a glowing quote I'd never given. I had become part of their mythology, a brand extension, a walking endorsement for schemes I never knew I was funding. And it worked, because no one ever suspects a mother, especially not one who wraps her schemes in words like legacy and sacrifice. Later that night, I drove to the old neighborhood, where Sable still lived in the renovated townhouse I had co-signed. The lights were on, she was home. I didn't go in, but I watched as she stepped out onto the balcony, phone pressed to her ear, face folded into tears. Guilt, maybe, or performance, or maybe something in between. The next morning, I woke to a new notification, a voice message, sent from a number I didn't recognize. It was Sable. I know you're going after her. I didn't think you'd really do it. You don't know the whole story, Taryn. You never did. She paused. There's something she kept from both of us. Something about Dad. You need to know before you burn the whole thing down. And just like that, the narrative bent again. Because I hadn't come looking for secrets, but secrets had started looking for me. When silence becomes currency, truth becomes a dangerous investment. The silence that followed Sable's message was not empty. It was weighted, dense, with the realization that even after all the unraveling, the truth still had layers left to expose. Her voice had cracked just enough to suggest sincerity, but not enough to inspire trust. And yet, I couldn't ignore the chill in her warning. There's something she kept from both of us, something about Dad. I hadn't thought of my father in years. His name had become ornamental, reduced to a framed photo on the mantel, and a middle name I rarely used. According to Marjorie, he had died when I was 10, in a car accident, clean and tragic, and too swift to question. There were no stories, no memories told at holidays, no mention of his voice, or his flaws, or his favorites, just vacancy, draped in grief that felt scripted even back then. But now, as I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by folders, flash drives, and old tax forms, I began to question whether that void had always been a hole, or if it had been a cover. I searched for the one box I hadn't opened since college, keepsakes from childhood that I had packed away when the weight of nostalgia became less comforting and more confusing. Inside, beneath an old trophy and a bundle of birthday cards that all bore the same precise maternal handwriting, I found a letter. The envelope was brittle, postmarked months after my father's death, addressed not to me, but to a lawyer whose name I vaguely recalled, Clifford Wiles, one of my father's former business partners. The letter wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. My father had left a trust, for me, a sizable one, structured with long-term growth in mind. Tuition, housing, a future business, even personal investments. He had thought of everything. What he hadn't foreseen was that Marjorie would override it. According to the addendum attached, Marjorie had filed for full executor rights, citing emotional distress, guardianship needs, and, most disturbingly, Taryn's lack of financial maturity. I stared at that phrase until the paper blurred. She hadn't just stolen money. She had erased intent. She had edited the past like it was hers to rewrite. And I, so eager to be the dependable daughter, had never asked. I had accepted the silence, I had bowed to the version of history she fed me, never realizing that behind her curated widowhood was a theft so intimate it bled into the way I breathed. Nico read the documents with a clinical calm that made me appreciate him more than ever. He didn't gasp, he didn't lecture. He just nodded once and said, "We now have motive, timeline, and proof of inheritance misappropriation. Combined with the fraudulent documents and Rachel's testimony, this is enough to bring civil and criminal charges across multiple jurisdictions." He paused. "But the more relevant question is, do you want to?" I didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't just about law, it was about legacy, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to end hers or start my own. The filings were submitted within 72 hours. Subpoenas followed. Sable was served first, and Marjorie, always 3 steps ahead, released a carefully worded statement to the press before the papers even reached her door. She called it a tragic misunderstanding between family members and positioned herself not as a defendant, but as a mother under siege. But spin only works if the surface remains smooth. And this time, the cracks were showing. Rachel's files were leaked by a third party. Donor fraud, forged expenses, money laundered through her women's foundation under false names, including mine. My role as executive donor advisor was printed in every press headline, followed by quotes I had never given and photos taken without consent. Marjorie had built her empire with my name as the cornerstone, and now it was collapsing. We met one last time, in a mediation room at a neutral firm downtown. The walls were a pale beige, designed to be calming, but in truth, oppressive in their effort to seem neutral. Sable arrived first, smaller than I remembered, her posture folding inward, like someone who knew the performance was over, but still didn't know how to exit the stage. Marjorie entered last, in cream cashmere and pearls, always branding herself as above the chaos she caused. She sat without invitation, folded her hands, and said, "You win." I didn't speak. She continued, "You want the money, the property, the headlines. Fine. But you will destroy what's left of this family, and I hope you can live with that." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a monster, but a woman who had never known how to love without ownership. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here for truth, and whatever it costs, it's cheaper than silence." She signed the documents. She forfeited all claims. Sable, under Nico's advisement, entered into a restitution agreement. 5 years, monitored, reported, no more family bank accounts, no more shared passwords, no more access. I didn't press for jail time, not out of forgiveness, out of clarity. I didn't want them hidden away. I wanted them to live in the world they created, without the comfort of my silence shielding them. 6 months later, I moved out of New York, not out of fear, not even grief, just to breathe in air that hadn't passed through their expectations. The ocean helped, so did the distance. Corbin visited once. We walked along the coast. He told me he still loved me, but that he needed something simpler, quieter. I understood. Simplicity is a luxury not all of us get to carry through the fire. I let him go without resentment. Some goodbyes are clean, not because they hurt less, but because they no longer confuse you. I launched a new fund, Not Her Shadow Capital, dedicated to women recovering from financial abuse, familial exploitation, and intergenerational manipulation. The first grantee opened a small bookstore after fleeing her parents' cult-like commune. The second was a woman like me, recovering not from poverty, but from expectation. I never used my old name again in business, not because I was ashamed, but because I had finally decided who I was, without anyone else's ink on the page. I haven't seen Marjorie in over a year. I hear she's moved to a smaller house. The foundation dissolved after losing donor confidence. She still sends letters. I never open them. Not because I'm angry, because I no longer believe there's anything in them worth reading. Sable sends emails. I read some, not all. She says she's in therapy, says she's sorry. Time will decide what's true. Sometimes I walk along the beach and whisper my father's name. not as a prayer, but as a promise. That I found my way back to the inheritance he meant to leave me. Not the money, not the trust, the self-worth, the freedom, the name I now answer to, with no hesitation. Some names you're born with, others you reclaim. The most powerful ones are the ones you choose. In the end, I learned that silence isn't love, and sacrifice without boundaries is just a slow form of self-erasure. When your worth is tied to how much you give, people will keep taking until there's nothing left of you but obligation. Healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like walking away on your own terms. But what about you? Have you ever had to unlearn what your family taught you about love, money, or loyalty? Have you ever had to choose truth over peace? If this story resonated with you, drop a 2 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't hit home, tell me why. It all matters here. If you're watching this and it sparked something real, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe to follow the next true story that could change the way you see your own.